I thought I would just bring a couple of thoughts about this season and this coming year. And I really love the tradition of setting revolutionary resolutions that the National Union of the Homeless does. And so I'll give a few of mine as well. So over the past few years for me, the winter solstice has kind of been a time for me to set intentions for the year to come. So it really dovetails really quite nicely with this idea of setting resolutions, revolutionary resolutions. I'm currently living in Ireland. I'm studying for a PhD, but it's quite interesting. So Ireland has a bunch of Neolithic sites that date back thousands of years. But what's really interesting is there's a lot of these sites, these stone kind of monuments that align with either the rising or the setting of the sun during the solstice. And so it makes sense that the winter solstice was especially important because Ireland's quite far north, and the days in the winter are very, very, very short. And the solstice marks that time, right, where the very longest night of the year ends when the sun rises on the solstice. And then from that time forward, for the next 6 months, the days grow steadily longer and the light increases. So we don't know exactly why people in Ireland thousands of years ago, what they did at these sites. We know that they were burial places to honor the dead. We know that this rising sun after the longest night was somehow important to them. But in modern times, the Irish newscast broadcasts every year on the winter solstice from Newgrange, or in Irish, Brú na Bóinne, which is one of these monuments. And I love watching the program. You can go in person now that I'm in Ireland, but I haven't done that. But I love watching it on the solstice because Ireland's quite cloudy. And the game basically is to see if the clouds clear on the morning of the solstice, to see if the sun comes through the portal and hits the back of the burial chamber where there's all of these symbols, Neolithic symbols. It is the only time of the year the sun hits that spot. This year, the sun didn't show up because there were too many clouds, but that's relatively typical. But there's this kind of sense of ritual every year as people in Ireland watch this. And I've been using that time to remember that even in this time of shadows, and as the summary earlier about this season says, this time of shadows and monsters, right, that we live in today, that the sun still rises like it has for millions of years on Earth. Light comes and the days grow longer every year. It reminds me that the systems we live with today are not eternal, that when those ancestors were watching the sun rise a few thousand years ago, here in Ireland, things were very different, right? They lived in a world where there wasn't private property, there wasn't homelessness. And according to what little we know through medieval texts, there were laws that protected the common good, and even trees had legal rights, strangely enough. And it wasn't a perfect system. It was messed up because humans are, but it also wasn't the empire we live with today. Right? It reminds me that capitalism is only 500 years old. It reminds me that these systems are not eternal, that humans have done better in the past, and we can do better in the future, and we can change the world that we live in today. I also tend to use this time to set my intentions for the coming year. And so I've been thinking about what my revolutionary resolutions are for this year. Because it's been a hard year. I mean, for me, it's a hard year and a long line of hard years. I worked with chaplains on the harbor for over 10 years in Grace Harbor County, and poverty and homelessness have been rising there for a very long time. And so I think back home to all of the people I still know who are struggling with poverty and homelessness and increasing lack of everything that they need. And I think of my mother, who died less than 2 years ago. She died at 65, partly because of lack of access to healthcare, partly because of the very many years she lived without health insurance or access to doctors. And also here in Ireland, where I live today, Ireland's following that same path of austerity as a tax haven for US corporations. While people here can still get welfare, and I was very shocked to find out that there weren't any water bills, that water is free. Things are still getting worse in a lot of ways. Homelessness is rapidly increasing, particularly in the cities where I live. So 16,000 people were counted as homeless this year in Ireland, which is a lot of people in a country of only 6 million. I mean, you can see it on the streets and communities as more and more people are living in the cold. And more refugees are ending up on the street as the refugee program in Ireland has started handing out tents to people who come as refugees from Palestine and Nigeria and Ukraine because there isn't housing. And the housing crisis here is quite severe. Rents are the highest in Europe. Housing quality is terrible. And in my neighborhood right now, as it's dropping below zero and starting to snow, most people in this neighborhood can't afford heating systems and are either using or either have very little access to heat for their homes. And so, like, thinking about all of this, these are the resolutions that I have set for myself for this year. First, I've committed myself to study. And I'm doing a PhD and all of that, but I don't really mean that. I don't mean that kind of study. I mean, I want to commit myself to studying, to revolutionary study, right, based on our own lived experiences. I was reading a speech by Fidel Castro 30 years ago, and he said that we live in complex times that require building more awareness and merging the best ethical and humane ideas from religion and from history towards revolution. And so this idea of understanding history and understanding the role that religion might play in revolution is something I want to dedicate myself to this year. And then the second thing is, as I've been living here in Ireland for 1.5 years, and I've committed myself to engaging in the struggle on the ground here while I'm here. There's been a groundswell of organizing towards mass movement to end poverty, to end capitalism in Ireland, to address environmental disaster. And so I'll be working with ecologists and organizers and lawyers this year who are addressing the absolutely incredible amount of environmental devastation here. And I'll also be working with people who are organizing on the ground to get better healthcare and addressing a lot of the failures of the Irish healthcare system, which is steadily getting worse with austerity. And I think and as part of that, right, I want to find ways to connect our struggles internationally across the working class, right? We are all, the working class across the world is struggling for the same things, struggling for their needs being met, struggling for life, from Ireland to the United States, from Venezuela to Palestine. And our struggles are all connected. And I think increasingly our organizing will be too. And so as I think about this year, I think the ruling class does seem incredibly powerful right now. They've funded a genocide in Gaza. They just kidnapped the Venezuelan president in a bid for oil. They've robbed people of health care, of homes, food stamps, education, hope for their future. But in the end, when I watch the sunrise on winter solstice, I think about how we are more powerful, right? The sun has risen for thousands of years on humans before empires suppressed us. And as empires have grown and as capitalism has developed, we have always resisted. And so this is why this time of Christmas, this reading the story that we read of Jesus born homeless in a stable is so important, right? Because Jesus was born in this time where the ruling class of his time was also incredibly powerful. And he built this mass movement of resistance to cast down the mighty from their throne and lift up the poor. And that's why I feel incredibly honored to be a small part of this movement and to be here with you all today.